Apparently, moving your own couch is a criminal offense if you do it within 20 feet of an HOA president on a power trip. I was unloading my sofa and suddenly became the star suspect in the case of the stolen porch furniture. No trial, no logic, just yelling and a cop car in the driveway. What started as sweat and cardboard boxes turned into one of the strangest HOA battles you'll ever hear. Stick around. I promise this ends in the most unexpected revenge you've seen involving lawn chairs. Comment if your neighborhood ever turned into an episode of Suburban CS. Let me back up. My name is Nathan Carter and I restore old furniture for a living. I run a small channel where I fix up beat-up pieces and give them new life. After my divorce, I decided to move from the city to Millbrook, a small town where I could rent a workshop and maybe find some peace. The house I found was perfect. Small, affordable, and in a quiet neighborhood with an HOA. How hard could that be, right? The morning of my move, I rented a U-Haul truck and drove to my storage facility to pick up my belongings. Most of my furniture was pretty beat up. That's the nature of my business. I buy broken pieces, fix them up, and either keep them or sell them. My pride and joy was this old 3-seat sofa I'd been meaning to restore for years. Navy blue fabric that had seen better days, a coffee ring stain on the right armrest from my ex-wife's morning routine, and a patch of duct tape on the back where our old cat had gotten a little too frisky. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine. Loading the truck by myself was harder than I expected. The sofa was particularly heavy, and I found myself struggling to get it positioned right in the truck bed. By the time I got to my new house on Maple Street, I was already sweating through my shirt. The neighborhood looked peaceful enough. Small houses with neat lawns, American flags here and there. The kind of place where people probably knew each other's names. I parked the truck in my driveway and started the process of unloading my life. The sofa was giving me trouble again. As I tried to slide it toward the truck's tailgate, it caught on something and lurched forward faster than I expected. I managed to catch it before it crashed to the ground, but just barely. That's when I heard the voice that would haunt my next 3 weeks. "Wait! That's my sofa! From my porch!" I looked up to see a woman storming out of the house next door. She was maybe 39, with messy brown hair that looked like she'd just rolled out of bed, wearing a stained yellow t-shirt and jean shorts that had seen better days. Flip-flops slapped against the pavement as she marched toward me, pointing at my sofa like she'd just caught me red-hand stealing the crown jewels. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," I said, still holding onto the sofa. "This is my furniture. I just picked it up from storage." But she wasn't having it. Her eyes were locked on my beat-up sofa like it was made of solid gold. "I had that exact sofa sitting right there on my front porch," she insisted, pointing to her covered porch area. "Brown leather, expensive, I've had it for months." I looked at my navy blue fabric sofa with its obvious stains and patches, then back at her. "Ma'am, this is navy fabric, not brown leather. See this coffee stain? And this duct tape patch?" But logic wasn't working here. This woman, I'd later learned her name was Marcia Blevins, was absolutely convinced that I had somehow stolen her porch furniture and replaced it with an identical fake. "You switched them," she declared. "Where's my real sofa?" By now, neighbors were starting to come out of their houses to see what the commotion was about. I counted at least 8 people gathering on sidewalks and peering from windows. Marcia pulled out her phone and started filming me. "I'm recording a theft in progress," she announced loudly enough for the whole street to hear. Standing there in my driveway, holding my own beat-up sofa while being accused of theft by a woman who clearly had some issues, I felt my peaceful new beginning crumbling around me. I tried one more time to reason with her. "Look, I can show you the wear patterns. This coffee ring is from my ex-wife 3 years ago. This duct tape is from where I patched a tear last year." But Marcia was beyond reason. "You planned this. You stole mine and brought a fake to cover your tracks." The crowd of neighbors was growing, and I could hear whispers and murmurs as people tried to figure out what was happening. I thought the crazy lady show was over when I finally managed to get my sofa inside the house, but 20 minutes later, as I was trying to unload my coffee table, I heard sirens. Marcia had actually called 911 on me for unloading my own furniture. Officer Blake Dorsey stepped out of his patrol car, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was young, maybe 29, with the kind of fresh-faced appearance that suggested he hadn't dealt with too many neighborhood furniture disputes. The crowd of neighbors had grown to about a dozen people, all standing around like they were watching some kind of street theater. Marcia immediately rushed over to him, her flip-flops slapping against the pavement with renewed urgency. "Officer, "This man stole furniture from my porch," she declared, pointing at me with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "I had a beautiful brown leather sofa on my front porch, and this morning it disappeared. Now he's moving in the same sofa." Officer Dorsey looked from Marcia to me, then to my sofa, which was now sitting safely in my living room but visible through the open front door. I still had the truck rental papers in my hand and the storage facility receipt in my back pocket, but somehow I felt guilty just by circumstance. Officer Dorsey pulled out his notepad with the weary expression of someone who'd learned that neighborhood disputes were rarely as simple as they first appeared. "Ma'am, can you describe the sofa you're missing?" Marcia launched into a detailed description that bore no resemblance to my actual furniture. "Brown leather, pristine condition, worth at least $2,000. I bought it last year and kept it on my covered porch because it was too nice for my living room." Then she pointed at my sofa again. "That is my stolen property." I stepped forward with my documentation ready. "Officer, I can prove this sofa is mine. Here's my storage facility receipt from yesterday, my truck rental papers from this morning, and I can show you every mark and stain on this piece." I led him to my sofa and started pointing out the details I'd tried to show Marcia earlier. "This coffee ring stain has been here for 3 years. My ex-wife always put her mug down in the exact same spot. This duct tape patch on the back is where our cat scratched through the fabric last year. I can even show you photos of this sofa in my old apartment." Officer Dorsey examined the sofa closely, taking notes as I described each mark and wear pattern. The coffee ring was clearly old and set into the fabric, the duct tape patch was obviously a home repair job, the entire piece had the lived-in look of furniture that had been used daily for years. Meanwhile, Marcia was describing a pristine brown leather sofa worth thousands of dollars. The disconnect was obvious to anyone with functioning eyes. That's when Ruth Halperin stepped forward. Ruth was 67 years old, with silver hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been my neighbor for exactly 2 hours, but she was about to become my most important ally. "Officer, I've been watching from my kitchen window since 7 this morning. I saw this young man loading furniture from that truck since he arrived." Marcia immediately jumped in with, "Ruth is 67 years old, her memory isn't reliable." But Ruth straightened up to her full height and looked Marcia directly in the eye. "My memory is fine, Marcia, and so are my eyes. I saw him struggling with that sofa for 10 minutes, trying to get it positioned right. For a moment I thought I might actually be arrested for possessing my own furniture." Officer Dorsey was being thorough, which I appreciated, but there was something surreal about having to prove ownership of a beat-up sofa I'd owned for 5 years. Marcia kept pushing for charges. "I want him arrested for theft! I want my property back!" She was getting more agitated by the minute, and I was starting to realize that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. Officer Dorsey finally closed his notepad after examining my documentation and comparing Marcia's description with the actual sofa. "Sir, your paperwork seems solid, and the condition of this furniture matches your story. Ma'am, without concrete proof that your sofa existed or evidence of theft, I can't make an arrest." Marcia's face went red. "This neighborhood has rules, officer. Standards. I enforced them as HOA president." There it was, the real issue. This wasn't about a sofa at all. As Officer Dorsey drove away and the crowd of neighbors dispersed, Marcia stood in her driveway staring at me with the kind of intensity that made me genuinely uncomfortable. "This neighborhood has rules," she repeated, "and I enforce them." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. I had no idea that I'd just declared war on the most vindictive person in Millbrook. After everyone left, I sat alone in my living room, staring at my beat-up sofa, now apparently evidence in an imaginary theft case. Even imaginary was enough to make my throat tight with anxiety. I had moved here for peace, for a fresh start where nobody knew about my failed marriage or my struggles to build a business. Instead, my first day ended with police at my door and accusations of theft. The weight of it settled over me like a heavy blanket. What if she really pushed this? What if other neighbors believed her story? I'd been in Millbrook for exactly 6 hours, and already I felt like a criminal in my own home. My hands were shaking as I made coffee, and I kept glancing out the window, wondering what Marcia was planning next. The sofa that represented my modest hopes for a new beginning now felt like a cursed object, sitting in the center of my living room like evidence I couldn't dispose of. I'd never felt so vulnerable in my own space, watching shadows move past my windows and wondering if they belonged to neighbors who now saw me as a thief. I thought crazy Marcia was done after the police visit. Then 2 days later, an official HOA letter arrived in my mailbox. That's when I realized the furniture incident was just round one. The first HOA letter was waiting for me when I got home from buying groceries on Thursday. Official letterhead, Marcia's signature, and a list of violations that made me question whether I'd accidentally moved into some kind of fascist microstate. Trash bin placed 15 minutes past designated pickup time. Vehicle parked 6 inches over property marker. Unregistered moving truck blocked street access for excessive duration. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a deadline for payment. I read through the letter twice, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. The trash truck didn't even come down our street until 8:30 in the morning, but apparently I was supposed to have my bin out by exactly 8:15. My truck was parked entirely within my driveway, but Marcia had apparently measured and determined it was 6 inches over some invisible property line. The moving truck violation was particularly ridiculous. I'd rented it for 4 hours and had it back to the rental place ahead of schedule. Friday morning, I discovered what I was dealing with. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I noticed movement in my front yard. Marcia was crouched next to my trash bin with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and what appeared to be a ruler. She was wearing what I could only describe as her official outfit, a blazer that had seen better days, thrown over her usual stained t-shirt, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was literally crawling on her hands and knees, measuring the distance from my trash bin to the curb with a ruler, then writing notes on her clipboard. I watched through my window as she took photos of my trash bin from at least 20 different angles, like she was documenting a crime scene. She measured the distance from the bin to my driveway, from the bin to the street, and from the bin to what I could only assume was some kind of imaginary property boundary. The whole performance took her nearly 15 minutes, during which she was completely oblivious to how ridiculous she looked crawling around my lawn with office supply. The second letter arrived on Monday. Window curtains wrong color for neighborhood aesthetic standards. This was getting personal now. I'd hung simple white curtains in my front windows, the most basic, inoffensive curtains possible. Apparently, they violated some HOA guideline about maintaining visual harmony. The fine was $75, and the letter included a link to approved window treatment options that all seemed to cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Tuesday brought letter number 3. Delivery truck violated 5-minute unloading rule. This was about a pizza delivery on Sunday night. According to Marcia's surveillance notes, the delivery driver had been in my driveway for 8 minutes and 30 seconds, which exceeded the HOA's reasonable delivery time frame. I started to wonder if Marcia was literally timing every vehicle that entered my driveway. Letter number 4 arrived on Thursday morning and pushed me over the edge. Suspicious nighttime activity observed at property. The suspicious activity was me accepting an Amazon package at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. According to the HOA violation notice, residents were expected to receive deliveries during appropriate daytime hours to avoid disturbing neighborhood tranquility. The fine was $100, and the letter mentioned that continued violations could result in escalated enforcement measures. I'd had enough. I called the number on the HOA letterhead and got Marcia's voicemail. "This is Marcia Blevins, HOA president. Leave a message and I'll respond within 24 hours unless it's an emergency." I left what I thought was a reasonable message, asking if we could sit down and discuss these issues like adults. When she called back 2 hours later, her tone was ice cold. "Mr. Carter, the violations are clearly documented with photographic evidence and precise measurements. You can pay the fines totaling $325, or you can face legal action. Those are your options." That's when Ruth knocked on my door. She was carrying a plate of cookies and wearing the expression of someone who had something important to say. "Nathan, can I speak with you privately?" We sat on my back porch, away from Marcia's line of sight, and Ruth told me something that changed everything. She did exactly this to Paul Danner last year. Same tactics, started with small violations, then escalated until people couldn't take it anymore. Paul was a good man, kept his property immaculate, never caused trouble, but Marcia wore him down with constant harassment until he sold his house and moved away after 4 months. Ruth explained that this was Marcia's pattern. She'd target someone new, usually someone without family in the area or deep community connections, and systematically make their life miserable until they gave up and left. Paul told me privately that he suspected she wanted his house because it had better garage space and a bigger backyard. After he moved, her friend Linda bought the place at below market value. The pieces were starting to come together. I realized that this wasn't random harassment. It was a systematic campaign designed to drive me out of the neighborhood. Marcia had weaponized the HOA to target people she wanted gone, hiding behind official procedures to make their lives unbearable. But unlike Paul Danner, I wasn't going anywhere. If Marcia wanted a fight, I'd give her one. I started documenting everything. Photos of her surveillance activities, copies of all her letters, timestamps of her trespassing on my property to take measurements. I thought documentation would protect me and give me leverage to fight back. Then Marcia dropped a bombshell accusation that could actually cost me my house. The emergency HOA notice was taped to my front door when I got home from work on a rainy Tuesday evening. Red paper, bold letters, and the kind of official language that made my stomach drop before I'd even finished reading it. Immediate attention required. Property damage assessment. According to the notice, I was being held responsible for damage to the shared sprinkler system that served our section of the neighborhood. The repair cost was estimated at $2,500 and payment was required within 10 days to avoid legal action. I stood in my doorway, reading the notice 3 times, rain dripping off the edge of my roof and soaking through my shirt. According to Marcia's detailed report, underground sprinkler pipes had been damaged during my furniture moving process, and the break had caused flooding in her backyard. She'd included photos of standing water, a broken pipe, and what looked like legitimate damage to her lawn. The timeline seemed to check out. The pipe had reportedly burst the day after I'd moved my furniture, and my truck had been parked near the property line where the damage occurred. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate the alleged damage site. Sure enough, there was a broken sprinkler pipe right near the fence that separated our properties. Water had clearly been flowing for some time, creating a muddy mess that extended into both yards. The pipe itself was old and rusty, and the break looked like the kind of deterioration that happens over time, but I had to admit the timing was suspicious. My truck had been parked within 10 feet of this exact spot during my move. The next morning, I received a call from Marcia informing me that an emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled for that evening to discuss my property damage violation. The meeting would be held in her living room, and attendance was mandatory for all parties involved in the dispute. When I arrived at 7 p.m., I found 8 of my neighbors sitting in Marcia's living room like a jury, with Marcia standing at the front of the room behind a folding table covered with official-looking documents. Marcia had prepared for this meeting like she was prosecuting a criminal case. She had a thick folder labeled Carter Property Damage Incident, filled with photographs, timeline documentation, and what appeared to be repair estimates from multiple contractors. The presentation was honestly impressive in its thoroughness, even if the conclusions were completely wrong. She walked the group through her evidence step by step, explaining how my heavy furniture moving equipment had obviously damaged the underground infrastructure. The timeline is clear, Marcia explained, pointing to a chart she'd created. Monday, sprinkler system functioning normally. Tuesday, Mr. Carter moves heavy furniture with a large truck parked directly over the pipe area. Wednesday morning, catastrophic system failure resulting in significant property damage. She showed photos of the flooded area, the broken pipe, and even what looked like tire tracks in the soft ground near the fence. The repair costs are documented here, with estimates from 3 licensed contractors ranging from $2,200 to $2,800. When it was my turn to defend myself, I felt like a defendant in some kind of kangaroo court. I showed the group my time-stamped work video call that proved I was inside the house during the time Marcia claimed the damage occurred. I pointed out that the pipe showed clear signs of age and deterioration, suggesting the break was due to normal wear rather than external damage. I even offered to pay for an independent inspection to determine the actual cause of the failure. But Marcia dismissed every piece of my evidence. Video calls can be edited, she said with the confidence of someone who'd clearly never tried to edit a video in her life. The pipe was functioning normally until your moving activities. The timing cannot be coincidental. Dave from down the street shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking between me and Marcia, like he was watching a tennis match. I don't know, he said slowly. The timing is pretty suspicious, Nathan. Carol from across the street nodded in agreement. Nathan, honey, it's just money. Why not pay it and we can all move on? You don't want to get a reputation as someone who doesn't take responsibility. The pressure in that room was suffocating. 6 out of 8 neighbors seemed to be buying Marcia's story, influenced by her authority as HOA president and the impressive presentation she'd prepared. Ruth sat quietly in the corner, occasionally catching my eye with supportive glances, but she was clearly outnumbered. Frank, an older man from 2 houses down, spoke up with the weariness of someone who'd learned to avoid conflict. Look, I've lived here 15 years. Sometimes it's easier to just go along with these things. Marcia knows the rules better than any of us. Even worse was watching my neighbors' faces as they processed Marcia's evidence. These were people I'd hoped to build relationships with, maybe invite over for barbecues or holiday parties. Instead, they were looking at me like I was already guilty, like someone who caused trouble and couldn't be trusted. Carol leaned forward with what she probably thought was kindness. "Nathan, you seem like a nice young man. Don't let pride get in the way of doing the right thing here." The way she said it made me feel like a child being scolded for breaking something valuable. Dave nodded along, adding, "We all want to get along here. Sometimes that means taking one for the team." As the meeting broke up, Marcia pulled me aside with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter, I hope you'll make the right decision here. This neighborhood values people who take responsibility for their actions. I'd hate to see this escalate to legal proceedings, especially when you're still settling in." The threat was clear. Pay up or face a lawsuit that could drag on for months and cost me far more than the original demand. Walking home in the dark, I realized that Marcia had escalated from petty harassment to potentially ruinous accusations. This wasn't about maintaining neighborhood standards. This was about systematically destroying my financial stability until I gave up and left. But if she thought I was going to roll over and write her a check for damage I didn't cause, she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong target. That night I started digging into Marcia's history, and what I discovered was going to blow up her whole operation. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about Marcia Blevins, and what I discovered painted a disturbing picture of someone who'd been using harassment tactics for years. Public records showed she'd been fired from her previous job as a property manager for excessive enforcement measures and resident complaints. Her divorce records mentioned controlling behavior and financial irregularities. Most importantly, I found 2 other families in our neighborhood who'd moved away in the past 18 months after conflicts with Marcia. Finding Paul Danner's contact information took some detective work, but when I called him, he was eager to share his story. "Nathan, I'm so glad someone is finally standing up to her," he said. "She did exactly the same thing to me, started with small violations, then escalated to major damage claims. I ended up paying $1,600 in bogus fees just to make her stop harassing my family." Paul's experience was virtually identical to mine, down to the emergency HOA meetings and the pressure from neighbors to just pay and move on. Paul agreed to provide written testimony about his experience, and he still had copies of all the harassment letters Marcia had sent him. The pattern was undeniable. She would target someone new, systematically escalate complaints until they reached major financial demands, then pressure them to pay or leave. The worst part, Paul told me, was how she turned the whole neighborhood against me. By the end, I felt like a criminal in my own home. The timeline of Paul's harassment coincided perfectly with what Ruth had told me about Marcia's friend buying his house below market value. But the most revealing detail came when Paul mentioned something he'd noticed during his final weeks in the neighborhood. "I started seeing furniture and lawn equipment in her garage that I swear belonged to other people. When I asked her about it, she said she was temporarily storing abandoned property for the HOA. Paul's voice grew quiet as he continued, "Nathan, you have to understand what this did to my family. My wife Sarah started having anxiety attacks every time she saw Marcia outside. Our 8-year-old daughter Emma asked me why the neighbors didn't like us anymore. I remember Sarah crying one night because she felt like we were being treated like criminals for existing in our own home. The final straw was when Emma came home from school asking if we were really bad people because some kid's mom said we didn't follow neighborhood rules. We couldn't put our child through that anymore." He paused, and I could hear the pain in his voice even over the phone. The day we moved out, I saw Marcia watching from her window with this satisfied smile. She knew exactly what she'd done. She'd driven a family away through systematic harassment, and she was proud of it. I still wake up sometimes feeling angry about how powerless we felt, how she made us run from our own home. Armed with Paul's testimony and documentation, I decided it was time to go on the offensive. I contacted every neighbor I could reach and requested a community meeting to discuss what I called concerning patterns in HOA enforcement. Rather than holding it in Marcia's living room, I reserved the community center and sent formal invitations to all 24 households in our 12 neighbors showed up on Saturday morning, including Marcia, who arrived with her usual clipboard and a folder full of what I assumed were additional violations she'd prepared. But this time, I was ready for her. I'd prepared my own presentation, complete with Paul's testimony, documentation of harassment patterns, and a timeline showing how Marcia's enforcement seemed to target specific individuals while ignoring identical violations by her friends. The surprise guest was Paul Danner himself, who drove down from his new home 2 hours away to testify in person. When he walked into that community center, Marcia's face went completely white. You could have heard a pin drop as Paul stood up in front of our neighbors and told his story. How Marcia had systematically harassed his family with escalating violations and financial demands until they felt forced to sell their home and move away. This woman drove me and my family from our home using the exact same tactics she's using on Nathan, Paul said, holding up the stack of violation letters Marcia had sent him. Her goal isn't neighborhood improvement, it's control and financial extraction. She targets people without deep community connections and wears them down until they pay or leave. The room was completely silent as Paul detailed violation after violation that mirrored my own experience. After Paul finished speaking, the silence that followed was deafening. You could see the realization dawning on faces around the room. Dave, who'd been supportive of Marcia just days earlier, slowly nodded his head, like someone seeing clearly for the first time. "Jesus," he whispered. "I told Nathan to just pay the money. I had no idea." Carol's hand went to her mouth as she processed what she'd heard. "Paul, I remember when you moved. Marcia told us you were difficult to work with. She said you refused to follow basic neighborhood standards." Frank, the older man who'd advised me to go along with Marcia's demands, stood up with his hands shaking slightly. "Paul, I owe you an apology. We all do. Marcia told us you were causing problems, that you were making the neighborhood look bad. We believed her because she was the president, because she seemed to know all the rules." His voice cracked with emotion. "We let her drive out a good family because we were too lazy or too scared to question her authority." Even neighbors who hadn't been at the original meetings were starting to speak up. A woman named Janet from the far end of the street raised her hand. "I've been wondering why my garden gnomes keep disappearing. Marcia said it was probably kids, but now I'm wondering if she's been taking them for violations." Another neighbor, Mike, mentioned that his outdoor Christmas decorations had vanished last year, right after Marcia complained they were excessive. But Marcia wasn't going down without a fight. She stood up and accused me of orchestrating a coordinated attack on HOA authority and claimed that Paul was lying about his experience. Mr. Danner was repeatedly warned about legitimate violations, she insisted. His decision to move was personal, not related to proper enforcement procedures. But her defensive tone and obvious panic suggested otherwise, and the room wasn't buying her victim act anymore. The community vote was dramatic. 8 neighbors now supported investigating Marcia's enforcement patterns. 3 still backed her authority as president, and 1 remained undecided. While we didn't get the decisive victory I'd hoped for, Marcia's absolute authority had been seriously undermined. More importantly, people were starting to ask questions about her methods and motivations. After the meeting, as neighbors were filing out, Ruth approached me with information that would change everything. "Nathan, there's something I haven't told you about what I've seen in Marcia's garage over the years." As Marcia packed up her materials across the room, clearly rattled by the day's events, Ruth leaned in close and whispered, "I think she's been taking things that don't belong to her." When I saw what Marcia was hiding in her garage, I realized this wasn't just harassment, this was straight-up crime. Ruth's revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. "Nathan, over the past 3 years, I've seen furniture and lawn equipment in Marcia's garage that I swear belonged to other families. Paul's patio set that went missing during his move, I'm almost certain it's in there." Ruth explained that she'd been keeping mental notes of inconsistencies for months, but hadn't known what to do with the information until now. When I called Paul to ask about missing patio furniture, his response confirmed Ruth's suspicions. "We did lose our patio set during the move, a 4-piece wicker set with blue cushions that cost us $900. The moving company swore they'd loaded it, but it never arrived at our new house. Our insurance covered the loss, but I always wondered what happened to it." Paul described the set in detail, including a small chip in one of the chair legs and a distinctive pattern on the cushions. Ruth had more details about Marcia's pattern. She waits for families to move, then claims anything left outside is abandoned property under HOA rules. I've watched her take plant pots, lawn decorations, even a bicycle that a family left in their driveway during their move. The scope of what Ruth was describing suggested years of systematic theft disguised as HOA enforcement. I realized I needed concrete evidence if I was going to expose Marcia's criminal behavior. That evening, I set up what I called the honey trap. I placed 2 expensive-looking outdoor speakers on my front porch, actually cheap speakers I'd bought at a discount store but placed in premium brand boxes I'd found online. I positioned multiple cameras around my property with night vision capability, making sure to get clear angles of both my porch and the pathway to Marcia's house. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, I was starting to think my plan was too obvious, but on the third night at exactly 1:32 a.m., my motion sensors activated. Through my bedroom window, I watched a figure in dark clothing approach my porch with a small flashlight. Even in the dim light, Marcia's distinctive silhouette was unmistakable. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app to watch the live feed from my security system. The night vision footage was crystal clear. Marcia's face was perfectly visible as she examined my expensive speakers, looked around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully picked them up and carried them toward her house. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. The next morning, I had everything I needed: multiple camera angles showing Marcia's face clearly, timestamps proving theft, and Ruth as a witness to my equipment setup. But more importantly, I now understood the full scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. This was someone who'd been systematically stealing from neighbors for years under the cover of official authority. I decided to confront Marcia directly before involving the police, partly because I wanted to see her reaction and partly because I hoped she might confess and return the stolen property voluntarily. But as I walked toward her house that morning, carrying my phone with the video evidence, I had no idea that what happened next would be even more dramatic than I'd planned. Ruth met me halfway, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I've been thinking about this all night," she said. "There's more in that garage than just Paul's patio set. Over the years, I've seen items from multiple families disappear right around the time Marcia had conflicts with them. Garden statues, lawn chairs, decorative planters, dozens of things that people probably just assumed were lost during their moves." As we approached Marcia's house, I could see her through her kitchen window, apparently having her morning coffee and checking her clipboard, probably planning my next violation. She had no idea that her years of theft and harassment were about to come crashing down around her, or that the evidence of her crimes was recorded in high definition on the phone in my pocket. I had her caught red hand on camera, but what happened the next few minutes was even better than I'd planned. I found Marcia in her driveway at 7:15 that morning, attempting to casually carry my stolen speakers from her garage back to what I assumed was their hiding place. She was wearing her usual ensemble of stained clothing and messy hair, but her movements were nervous and furtive in a way I'd never seen before. When she spotted me approaching with my phone in hand, her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally panic. "Mornin', Marcia," I called out cheerfully. "How are you enjoying those new speakers?" She froze like a deer in headlights, still holding my decoy speakers in both hands. "These were abandoned property," she stammered, "left outside in violation of HOA property maintenance standards. I was confiscating them according to proper procedures." I held up my phone and showed her the crystal clear night vision footage of her theft. "On my porch? At 1:30 in the morning? That's called burglary, Marcia." Her reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. First came denial. "You can't prove anything. That video could be anyone." Then anger. "You're harassing me. This is entrapment." Finally, desperation. "I have authority as HOA president to remove violations." But there was no explaining away video footage that showed her face clearly as she stole property from my porch in the middle of the night. That's when I played my ace card. "Marcia, Paul Danner is driving down here this morning to identify his stolen patio furniture. Ruth has been documenting your theft pattern for 3 years. And I'm calling Officer Dorsey right now to report multiple counts of burglary and theft." I could see her mental calculations as she realized how completely exposed she was. Officer Blake Dorsey arrived 30 minutes later with backup and a search warrant that I'd helped him obtain by providing my video evidence and Ruth's witness testimony. Marcia's panic escalated to complete meltdown territory as she realized the police were there for her this time. "This is harassment. He's targeting me because I enforce neighborhood standards." But Officer Dorsey had seen my footage and Ruth's documentation, and he wasn't buying her victim act. The garage reveal was like something out of a crime drama. When that door rolled up, it exposed what could only be described as a hoarder's paradise filled with stolen neighborhood property. Paul's wicker patio set with blue cushions was right there in the front, exactly as Ruth had described. Behind it were garden statues, lawn chairs, decorative planters, a bicycle, and dozens of other items that had clearly come from multiple households over several years. But the ultimate twist was hidden in the back corner of the garage, Marcia's actual sofa, brown leather, exactly as she described in her original theft accusation against me. When Officer Dorsey pointed it out, asking, "Ma'am, if this is your sofa, what was your complaint about Mr. Carter's furniture?" the truth finally came out. Marcia had genuinely become confused about which sofa belonged to whom, probably due to the same mental instability that drove her to steal from neighbors in the first place. "I was protecting property values," she screamed as Officer Dorsey placed her in handcuffs. "People abandon nice things. They don't follow rules, so they don't deserve nice furniture." Her complete psychological breakdown was both shocking and oddly satisfying after weeks of systematic harassment. Paul arrived just as Marcia was being loaded into the police car, and the look of vindication on his face when he spotted his stolen patio set was worth everything I'd been through. "There it is," he said quietly. "The chip in the chair leg, the stain on the blue cushions. Huh. That's definitely our set." Other neighbors started coming out of their houses as word spread, and several more people identified items they'd lost over the years. Within a week, an emergency HOA vote had removed Marcia as president and elected me as interim replacement. My first act was implementing new policies that prevented harassment-based enforcement and required community approval for any fines over $25. The neighborhood atmosphere changed completely almost overnight. People were friendlier, more relaxed, and actually seemed to enjoy living there again. 2 months later, Marcia received a sentence of 6 months in county jail for theft and abuse of HOA authority. The story made the local newspaper, right next to an advertisement for my weekend garage sale. Paul and his family decided to move back to the neighborhood after Marcia's sentencing, and as a housewarming gift, he brought me a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Carter's Workshop," for my garage. Ruth started a neighborhood garden club that met in my backyard every Saturday morning, and we'd sit around my famous sofa, planning community events and sharing coffee. The most satisfying part was what happened to my famous sofa. I placed it in the center of my living room like a throne, and it became a neighborhood legend. Ruth started coming over for coffee every morning, and we'd sit on that beat-up old sofa laughing about the whole adventure. Paul and his family would stop by for weekend barbecues, and his daughter Emma would curl up on the sofa reading books while the adults shared stories about rebuilding our community. My furniture restoration channel exploded in popularity when I shared the story, though I was careful to protect everyone's privacy. The tale of the HOA president who called the cops over a sofa and ended up exposing her own crime ring resonated with people across the country who dealt with similar neighborhood dictators. I started getting messages from viewers sharing their own HOA horror stories, and my subscriber count tripled within a month. Dave stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer and an apology. "Nathan, I owe you big time. We all believed Marcia because she seemed so official, so sure of herself. I never thought to question whether someone in authority might be lying." We spent the evening on my back porch talking about how easy it is to go along with bullies when they hide behind official titles and procedures. It all started with me unloading my beat-up sofa while some crazy woman claimed I stole it from her porch. Now that same sofa sits in my living room like a champion's throne, and every neighbor who walks by knows exactly why it's special. As for Marcia, last I heard, prison doesn't have HOA rules, but it does have plenty of people who don't appreciate furniture thieves. And unlike her old job, that position doesn't come with measuring tape privileges.